Well, good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to our Delaware-Otsego Audubon Society program for January. It looks to be a great one, and I know we have a lot of interest. So thanks for joining us. A few announcements I want to make before we start. One is about our optics raffle, which is one of our big fundraisers for the year. And it's particularly special this year. We have some great prizes, including a Canon SX70 camera with a memory card. Very nice camera for bird photography. And also 2 pairs of Nikon binoculars, very high quality binoculars. So if you're not a photographer, you can use the binoculars. And information on the raffle, which is just starting up, is on our website, www.doas.us. Our next program, which will also be a Zoom presentation, February 17th, on the symbolic meaning of birds to Inuit people. A little bit different topic, but should be interesting. March 17th, the program will also be a Zoom program, and that will be forest birds and young forest management, and that'll be presented by Roger Massey, who is on the faculty at SUNY Cobleskill. We will also have April and May programs. The details will be available later, and those are live programs. We'll be back to meeting in person for those, which will be great. I wanted to note that we're seeking 2 directors for our summer day camp for children that we have up at our wildlife sanctuary. And if you know someone looking for a summer job, perhaps a college student with an interest in outdoor education, you can visit our website or direct them to our website to get more information. The camp is very successful, very popular. All information on all this and our other activities, including membership, can be found at www.doas.us. During the program, if you do have questions, and you very well may, use the Q&A button on your screen, and we will be monitoring the questions and getting answers for them either through the program or at the end. So that's the technique for getting questions in. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our other co-president and also program chair, Becky Gretton.
Hi everybody. Thank you, Andy. I do want to mention to everyone that the questions will be answered at the end of this program. And also I would like to mention that this is being recorded and will be available on our website towards the end of next week. So our presenter this evening, Landa Palmer, has recently retired from her position as associate professor in the School of Nursing at SUNY Delhi. She has been a DOAS board member since 2019. Her exquisitely timed bird photos and the evocative seasonal landscape images of the farm where she lives are familiar to the readers of our Facebook page and our newsletter. Tonight, Landa will take us on her once-in-a-lifetime journey to Grimsey Island, Iceland. Welcome, Landa.
Well, thank you very much. As I'm getting this set up, I will point out that I'm in day 2 of my retirement. So it's something to get used to, as I'm sure many people know. I know I have a number of family members who are probably participating tonight. And as I was thinking about an adventure that I wanted to go on, I did a bit of research. I knew I wanted to do something different, not go where others necessarily want to go. And I found this trip. It was a photography puffin trip on Grimsey Island above Iceland. And I I mentioned it to my husband and my children, and they all said, go. So I just want to thank them for that, because that just really gave me the bravery that I needed to move on. So this is one of the first pictures that I took when I got to Grimsey, and there's going to be many pictures of puffins throughout the presentation, but also many of the other birds that were wonderful surprises for me when I was there. And I always have to coach this along. This is obviously a picture of Iceland, of the map. The blue lines would be if you were going to walk from Reykjavik to Grimsey, it would take you about 700 hours or 700 days, that said. And obviously that wasn't going to happen. So I flew into Reykjavik, where I met the group the next day at a very small little airport, just the local airport, where we boarded a very small plane and took off for Akureyri, which, if I can find my cursor right up here, right like at the beginning of that section there was where Akureyri was. We spent a night there. It was a very sweet little town. And then the next morning, we loaded up the van with all our equipment and our stuff, and the 8 of us drove up to Dalvik, which is a small fishing village where we caught the ferry. So you can kind of see, that's the layout. And up here, I have to move my Zoom thing so I can see. Right under here is where the island of Grimsey is. So this is a photo of the port of Dalvik. It was a very small village. They had a coffee shop, so that was handy. And this was the ferry that we loaded into, and I called the boat of death. I really did think I died before I got there. People who know me know I have a lot of trouble with motion sickness, and this boat about did me in. I went up on top because I know cold, fresh air helps me feel better. And unfortunately, I chose a spot on the boat that didn't have any sunshine. And the high temperature that day was 40, and winds are always a constant, pretty much out of the north. So by the time I got to where we were landing on Grimsey, I was pretty dehydrated and I was definitely hypothermic. So I was very glad there were a couple of other healthcare providers on the trip, and they quickly got me the help that I needed, with a big cup of tea and a lot of cream and a lot of sugar. And in about an hour, I was ready to roll. So survived it, and learned later from the captain of the ship, when I went back to board the ship to come back home, he laughed and said, "I can't believe you're back." He said, "That was pretty rough." And he said, "We really haven't had those types of waves in a long time, but it was about 7.5 foot waves." And he said, "That's what caused the big problems for me." So this is an aerial view. One of the other participants, a great guy with a ton of equipment. He came with everything you could imagine related to photography, and he also had a drone camera. And he took this photo, and I thought it was a great addition to share with you, because you can see what the topography is, and you can really see how small this island is. It has one road. Up here in kind of the northwest corner of the island is the little tiny village. That's where the ferry comes in and all the fishing boats come in. There are about 60 residents who live on this island, 60 and then 40 year round. And they have a small school. They have a little gift shop. They have a grocery store that is open from 10 till 2, 4 days a week. So you had to be pretty organized to be living there, I think. I met the woman in the gift store, which I was really pleased. I was able to get myself an Icelandic sweater there, and everything in the store was made by the local people. And the woman who was running the gift shop was also the superintendent of the school, and she was the principal of the school, and she was the teacher of the school, and she homeschooled during the pandemic. So it was really interesting to talk with her. Students stay at the school until, as she put it, they reach double digits. When they hit double digits, then they go over to the mainland for the school year, and they stay with friends or family, but they stay there for the school year. They don't come back and forth. The ferry ride was about 4.5 hours, so that would be, or 4 hours, excuse me, that would be a little too much. So that's what the island looked like. There is one landing strip for an airplane, which we researched, like, could we get an airplane to come get us to take us home versus going on the ferry, and no such luck. So this was the little guest house where we stayed, very comfortable, very thick walls. So you really didn't hear the wind when you were inside, and it was quite warm. And it was very lovely. We had a cook. We were very well taken care of. And the other picture to the right was the picture that was from my room. I was up on the second floor and I just couldn't take my eyes off it. That photo I probably took about 11 p.m. at night, because we were definitely in the long hours of daylight. So the sun, it would often set around midnight, and it would be back up before 2 a.m. when we were there. That's another close-up view of that same view from that picture from my room. And I just really like this one because of the different blues, the different hues, and I love the contrast with the water, which was the Greenland Sea. This was a sunset that I took one night, and the sunset was about midnight. And it's just very different. I found it very hard to kind of like slow my pace down a little bit and be able to tell myself to go to sleep. I didn't like to pull the blackout curtains because I was afraid I was going to miss something. But after a couple of nights, it was time to pull the blackout curtains. But it's pretty. It's very pretty. This is the only lighthouse on the island. And what we were told was that the lighthouses of Iceland are orange. That's their like national lighthouse color. I thought it was beautiful. I really particularly liked the shadow here. It's a little hard to see it when you're looking forward, but it's the shadow of this spot over here on the right where you would enter into the lighthouse, which we were not able to do, which was too bad, but it was okay. If you look here, these are some of the cliffs. The lighthouse is here, the top of the cliff. You could walk right out to the edge, depending on how brave you felt. And it would drop down about 100 to 200 feet. If you look very carefully in the shadow, you can start to see some puffins. Across from the lighthouse, there was a puffin colony there. And this is the orb. And I just laughed when I saw it because it's just such a orb. It's just such a big cement ball. And this is the tourist attraction for the island. So people would take the ferry, that 3.5-hour trip across that water. I can't imagine. And then they'd get off, and then they would walk about a mile or two up to where this orb was. And the orb signified that's where the Arctic Circle was. They'd get their picture taken, they'd walk back, they'd get on the boat, and they'd go back. And after my trip, it just baffled me that anybody would do such a thing. You can see in the center of the ball, there's an opening, and once a year, the locals would put a big pipe through the center, and then they'd put people on each end, and they would adjust the ball to have it perfectly aligned with where the Arctic Circle was, because the ball would move or the Arctic Circle would move. And so that's what they were telling us. Once a year, they have a bit of a ceremony and they go up and correct the ball. So these were our guides on the trip. A lot of fun, really wonderful people. Joseph is in the red jacket, and he is the owner of the company. He does many photography tours all around the world. And sadly, he had COVID when he started our trip. We were in an airport and I took one look at him and I said, "You don't feel good?" And he said, "No, I don't." And he tested and he was quite sick, but he stayed with the group. We were able to put him in a room where he could isolate and we could put food outside. And we had a couple of doctors on the trip too. So he was well taken care of. This is a typical pose for Daniel. He's quite a character. I would encourage you to Google Daniel Bergman photography because his work is beautiful. He's really amazing. He has a wonderful sense of humor, a very dry sense of humor, and he could very easily just get me every time. He would say things like I'd be on the edge of a cliff and he'd say, "That's a great shot you have there. But do I have your husband's cell phone number? Because I'd like to call him when you fall and you're out in the ocean and we can't find you anymore." So he was just a lot of fun. Very, very knowledgeable. He's highly respected in Iceland for his environmental work, his bird knowledge, and his photography. So we were, I thought, very, very lucky to have Daniel with us. And there's the puffins. On this island, they are estimating, or they have been counting and monitoring puffins for years and years. And they get about 20,000 puffins that come in for breeding every year. The only predators the puffins have are humans, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The puffins come in for breeding. They mate with the same mate. How do I say that? Their partner each year, and they use the same burrow to lay their egg. Once the breeding season has completed and the fledgling has left the burrow, they shed that beak, and the beak is just gray, and then they head back out to sea for the rest of the year. And they float in rafts. There's, sometimes hundreds in a raft. And they eat, and they are just out in that dark ocean, in the cold and in the dark all winter long. So I kind of decided I did not want to come back in my next life as a puffin. I think I'll find something else. But they're very interesting birds. When their beak starts to change color, that's when the breeding season begins. And they said that they usually are back to the island by the end of May. That's when the breeding will start. And then they're usually gone by September, all very much dictated by how much light is on the island. The other thing, it's a little hard to see unless you get really, really a close-up shot. The beak has ridges, and as you count the ridges, that's the number of years of the age of the bird. This is another close-up shot. I really liked this one because it shows the texture and how smooth the feathers lie. I look at a puffin, and sometimes when I look at the eye of the puffin, I think, boy, they're so sad looking. And then other times I look at them and I think, you know what, you look like a clown. And then when you watch their behavior, they are very clown-like. So this is very typical. Many puffins together, they're very social with each other. They make the strangest noise, and I was going to try to embarrass my children and make the noise myself, but I'm not going to because it wouldn't work out so well. But I am going to try to play it, and I hope you can hear it. Somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. No sound? No. Oh. No? Oh, well, do yourself a favor and just Google Atlantic puffin sounds. They kind of have like a snoring sound that sounds like a chainsaw. It just like that when you're pulling the chain. So when you get about 20,000 of them all making that noise, it gets quite loud. This is the typical burrow. Daniel said this one's probably pretty old because it's starting to degrade. The when they mate, they pick their burrow or they make their burrow. They will reuse other burrows that are empty, and they will use the same burrow for the lifespan of their ability to breed and lay eggs. They put the egg very far back in the burrow, so it's very unusual to be able to see a young puffling. And I love that word, puffling. And the puffling stays way in the back. The birds come, like the pair will just take turns going out to sea to get more feed to bring back to the puffling. They go into these little burrows by kind of hopping down off of the big tall cliffs. So it's pretty fascinating to watch them. One day we were out, and of course Daniel had told me, you'll never get a picture of a puffling. Well, when people tell me never, I always take that as a bit of a challenge. And I just kind of pointed my camera at a hole and thought, well, I'm going to push my lens out as far as it goes. I'll let it automatically focus and just see what happens. And when I got back to the house for a rest later in the day, everybody would sit and go through their photos. And I looked and I looked and I thought, you got to be kidding me. And if you look really careful, right in here is a puffling. And there are the two eyes, if you can see that. And then there's this kind of like little funny blob on the front. I think if you use your imagination, that is where the beginning of the beak is starting to grow. I was quite surprised. It was totally unintentional. And then when I showed it to Daniel, he just laughed and laughed. And he did a cartwheel, actually, because he was so excited that I'd gotten a picture of a puffling. And here's one in flight. I was pretty lucky with this one because the sun was out, which didn't happen very often. And the gentleman I told you about who came with all the equipment, he kind of threw a challenge at me and said that you will never get a good puffin in flight with that camera and that lens that you have. And he wasn't mean about it. He was just making a point because my camera is very basic, my lens is very basic, and I did not have the equipment that he was carrying. And again, I thought, all right, I'll show you. We're going to get this puffin in flight. So the thing that Daniel helped me with was that when the winds are at the strongest out of the north is the best time to get a puffin in flight, because they have to pretty much put their brakes on before they land. Otherwise, they're going to smash into the cliff. And so one evening after dinner, he said, you're coming with me. We're going up to the North Cliff. The winds were probably at like 30 to 35 miles per hour, which on Grimsey Island, they call that breezy, because they typically have winds of 20 to 30 miles per hour every day. But it did allow the puffin to slow down a minute so that I could get a good flight picture. They dive like little torpedoes off of those cliffs. They are incredibly fast for such an awkward looking bird. This is another picture I really liked. This is the sand eel that they go out in the waters to bring back to feed their pufflings. And they swim and they scoop the sand eels up into their mouth. And on the roof of their mouth, or like in the top beak, there are little tiny hooks that are just like Velcro. So as they would pick up the sand eel, they push it up to the roof of their mouth. And those little hooks hold on to it, and then they can swim through and get another batch and another batch. So they come back with big mouthfuls of these sand eels. They also will grab baby cod, and trust me, there's a lot of cod there. We had cod for breakfast, and we had cod for lunch, and we had cod for dinner. And when we weren't eating cod, we were eating lamb. So that was their typical fare. Another one in flight. They always look kind of goofy. They look incredibly awkward when they're in flight. They wobble all over. The wind's pushing them everywhere. And if you look down at the birds that are not in focus, that's where they're coming into land. So they kind of like swirl around to the same spot where they left from. We learned the patterns of how they would leave the cliff. They would go out to a particular area to eat, and then they would take a loop and come back. And they always landed in the same place where they left from. So if you took your lens and followed them and just kept the focus moving at the time that they came back, you were ready to grab them in flight. So it took some practice, and I was very grateful to have a lot of teachers, actually. Everybody in the group was helping each other. And I had to bring back a picture of ticks. We were looking at this bird, and at the same time, one of my buddies was sitting next to me, and I looked at her sweater and I said, "Oh my gosh, you have ticks climbing up your back." And I was alarmed. Others were alarmed. We all are very aware of Lyme disease. And Daniel very quickly said, no, our ticks don't carry diseases. And I was like, how does that work? And I don't understand that. Someday that might be something I have to check into more. But the ticks do go on the puffins. Many of the other birds that I'll show you, they eat the ticks, and that's what keeps the numbers down. But he said they really aren't interested in humans. They are after the puffins. And with 20,000 puffins to choose from, they didn't bother us. And I thought that was interesting. And this is the only predator of the puffin. Andy, I think you'll remember when you and I were first talking about me taking this trip, Andy asked me, "Are you going to eat puffin?" And I was very sure that Andy was pulling my leg. I really thought he's trying to pull one over on me. And when I got to Grimsey, I learned very quickly that they do eat puffin. They eat puffin raw, they eat puffin fried, they eat puffin baked. And these are puffin hunters. They've been eating puffin on this island since man ever went there. In the beginning of time, when as far back as they could research, they have recordings of the local people eating puffin, eating kittiwake, eating eggs of any kind, and of course eating fish, and being cod is the main one. The hunters would come in. It was disturbing to watch. They would have hunters up on the cliff, and they would net a puffin and basically just throw it down to the people on the shore 200 feet below. And they hunt. We only saw them once in the 8 days that we were there. And there are no rules, there's no licensing. That's just not how they operate. But it is their way of life. And it was a good discussion that we had with a local person and that Daniel had brought to come and talk to us about this. And this is a typical picture of the cliffs. Every now and then you'd see a cliff side like this. You wouldn't see the puffins necessarily like down here on the rock. You can see up here at the top, there's another puffin colony all through there. I wish my geology daughter would tell me what this word is. I never can remember, but the columns of the stone, and she talks about how that all develops over time. But this was very typical, and it was quite a distance down. Daniel, he said, "You can come out here." And he went out here and did one of his little jigs out at the very tip. And I declined to go because it just didn't look safe for me at all. They have Icelandic sheep on the island. They aren't contained in any manner. They roam free throughout the island. And this is a very typical picture that you'd find in other places in Iceland as well. And I kind of liked this one. It just looked like the sheep was looking off into the distance and contemplating life. My father was a sheep farmer, so I know that sheep don't think about too much. So I imposed a little bit of my thinking into that picture. And here's the last picture of the sheep right on the edge of that cliff that I showed you, right up to the very edge. And you could see the places where the sheep would sleep and take their rests. And it was pointed out to me by a very wise person that they do that because then they only have to protect one side. And I thought to myself, well, who's their predator? They don't have a predator. There's no other like threatening species on that island. They don't have any type of coyotes, or they don't have any raptors of any kind. So the sheep were there for really for wool, and then of course to eat. Here's a picture of a kittiwake, and I didn't know what a kittiwake was, and just I like the word, and I like how the word writes, and so I was excited to see the kittiwake. And I met a lot of other shorebirds. I really did not know much about shorebirds before I went on this trip. I liked this photo of the kittiwake mostly because of the water, and it kind of gives you that motion, and I really liked the colors. And they're everywhere. They're everywhere. This is a photo, of course, of a kittiwake feeding her chick. And it was fun. They really tuck into these little tiny shelves of stone or rock. It's amazing where they build their nests, and I'll give you a better picture to look at. And this was very typical. They would be on one side of a cliff and then not on the other. So they were picking, their sites depending on the weather. I'm sure they've been there for a million years. They make their nests out of seaweed and bird poop. That's how they hold that all together. And trust me, there was a lot of bird poop. It was everywhere. I kind of got a kick out of this chick right here, kind of resting as the adult bird was resting and just kind of looking up. I just thought that was kind of funny. But there are many of these. They lay 2 to 3 eggs. They often will raise 2 to 3 chicks, and sometimes the chicks do fall out of the nests, and there's no way the adult bird could rescue them at that point. An Arctic tern. If you've met an Arctic tern, you have met an Arctic tern. They are very aggressive. That little sharp beak will come down and poke you in the head if you're in their breeding area and threatening them at all. But they don't come just one bird at a time. They come as a flock. And at the guest house, they had a container with the poles that were like 3 to 4 feet long. And they said, when you're going out, there was one path that went right through the breeding area. They said, take a pole, hold it up, because they'll attack the highest point. I found that if I had a wind jacket with a big hood and a visor, they didn't bother me. And if I pulled my hood down, then they came right at me. And I always wondered if it had something to do with my white hair. But they're very aggressive. They're very protective. They will be aggressive as a group. And I met my first one, my first day, because I was excited. And I went out, I had my lens pulled all the way out, and seriously, this bird backed right up to me in flight, and he shat the whole way down my lens. So lesson was learned. So. And just another view. I think they're a beautiful bird. I loved watching them. I loved the shape of their tail, the shape of their wings. Just a really fun bird to get photos in flight. You could easily focus on the eye, and they're really beautiful. They are the birds of the eternal sun. So they're up north in Iceland and many other places to breed. And then as the sun starts to shift and the day gets shorter, they head to where the sun's going to be the eternal sun. So they leave the Arctic area and head down to Antarctica. And this was a Arctic tern chick. I was walking on that one road that went up the island, and we had a big van that carried all of our equipment, and we could ride, and he could give us quick trips back to the guest houses we needed. And they were coming up behind me, and this chick was in the road, so I was waving them down, saying, "The chick's in the road." And Daniel said, "Well, pick it up and move it." So, and he said, "But beware." And I picked that bird up, and I must have had 30 Arctic terns ready to let me have it. But I will share that picture. That was the cell phone picture somebody else took. But it was pretty sweet to hold an Arctic tern chick in my hand for a minute or two. It was fun, really fun. And then Daniel said, "Okay, now you got to take it out there in the field, so have fun." And they followed me out, and I could hear them hitting me through my hood. I placed the chick down and I went back and sat on the road. It probably took another 45 minutes before the birds calmed down enough for the adult to come in to feed the baby. So I think I was pretty lucky to get that shot. I liked the common redshank. I thought they were really beautiful. Another bird I was able to get in flight. So I will tell you, by the end of the trip, I pulled my friend aside and I said, "Let me show you what this very simple camera and lens can do." And that was we had a good laugh over it. They were shy to a point, but they would go and they would get up on these little hillocks of grass, and they would just watch you, and you could, just keep walking and take their pictures and keep on going, and they would kind of follow you up the road. So I thought they were quite beautiful. And the black-ringed plover, they were plentiful. And I found them to be very much like our killdeer. They are the drama queens. They would flop on their side. They would spread out their wing and their tail feathers and drag themselves along. I even had one completely lay on its side. It was really hilarious to watch. And then they would squawk and carry on. And they really, they put on their scene when you were getting into their breeding territory. And we were very conscious of where we were walking, so we weren't disturbing. They were a lot of fun to watch. And eider ducks, they were plentiful on the one end of the island. They had already, hatched their ducklings, and they would come in and they would rest on top of the kelp, and the water would come in and kind of lift them up and then set them back down, and the water would go out. And that was where they were resting. I was not able to get to the site where they had nested. It was very, very slippery trying to walk on that. And we weren't encouraged to go. But the local people still do go out, and after nesting is done, they'll go and collect whatever eider they can. I read up on eider a little bit because I had not heard about eider, and thought, "Oh, I'm going to go home and get myself an eider coat." And I don't know if you've ever looked at the cost of a eider coat, but needless to say, I'm not going to get one. So it was a nice dream for a minute. And this is the reality. The bird on the right is dead. It was an eider duck. It could have been blown into a cliff. It could have been hit by a boat. It could have just died. It could have been attacked by another bird. But it wasn't uncommon to see a carcass of a duck or even the kittiwakes. And then this was garbage that was found on the beach. It really was the only time I saw garbage on the beach. And we kind of dug through it, and we were able to find some lettering and words. It certainly wasn't something local. It had come a long distance to get there. But I thought it was important to kind of record that, because it's the reality of anywhere you go. And this is the golden plover, the Eurasian golden plover. I thought they were beautiful. As plentiful as our robins are, the golden plover is to this island. They were everywhere, and really fun to watch. I love their coloring. And this lets you see a little bit of the vegetation also. And this bird was probably squawking at me. And just another same bird. Really allows you to see the golden colors a bit more. The harlequin ducks, I was watching them. I took this photo from very high up on a cliff and wasn't sure it would turn out, looking down is always a hard photo to take, but they were beautiful. They would dive underwater and you'd wonder, and they would dive as a group. There were 6 in this group. And you'd wonder where they went. And then all of a sudden up, they'd pop in another area and it would be the same group of 6. But I thought they were really quite beautiful. So I added these. These were all lifers for me while I was there. So it was fun to add them to my list. And I'm just wondering how many different types of birds you can see in this picture. Maybe our moderators can give a shout out on that. Let's start with how many birds do you see? 4 birds. And how many types? 3. They are so camouflaged. I would go down and I would sit on a big boulder and I would just wait. And it took me forever to get my eye up on this one, the turnstone, which, as Becky knows, I call turning stone all the time. But the turnstone, they're beautiful, but they blended in. They were nearly impossible to see until they moved. And once they moved, you'd be like, what was that? And where'd it go? And then here is the purple sandpiper. I loved it when a flock of those would fly over. They just made a beautiful sound. And then the oyster catcher. So that was a lot of fun. And here again is just showing you the purple sandpiper and how they blend in. This is what the shore is. I had a family member say to me, "You didn't go swimming while you were there?" I said, "Oh, no." I never got above 40. I don't know what the temperature of the water was, but this is what you would have to walk on. And it was very uneven. The rocks underneath were very slippery. But the birds blend in very, very well, and it makes it difficult to see them. These guys were really cool. I just loved the red-necked phalaropes. I would sit on the edge of the road and they would come right up to me. I had to quickly switch my big telephoto lens to a smaller lens because they would come so close. And I just kept saying, they are very cheeky little birds. So. And the snow bunting. Oh my goodness. I have never seen a snow bunting in our area. I have tried for years to see a snow bunting in Delaware-Otsego, Schoharie County. I have never been able to find one. My very first snow bunting I saw in Michigan. And when I got to Grimsey Island, this is all we heard, were the snow buntings singing. They were in breeding season. They would nest in those cliffs. You couldn't get to see where the nest was. Truly beautiful. I'd get up in the morning and on the roof line, there would be 12 snow buntings just chipping away, making noise. It was so fun. But I just laughed and laughed. I said, I don't know if I'll ever see one around here. I'm going to have to keep traveling to see the snow buntings. And I know many people have, right, Becky? I know you have many times. I liked the razorbill. I thought they were very, very distinguished looking birds. In taking their photo, it was hard to really even see their eye because they're so dark. They are the closest to the extinct great auk. And then the black guillemot, that was the closest we got to one of those. And that's just another type of auk. The razorbills are in groups. There's thousands of them there. They are really fast. They're much faster than the puffins. So I never caught one of those in flight. And here are my new friends. These are the group who was there. They were from California, Texas, Maryland, Arizona, New York. Fascinating people. They had traveled the world. They were quite intrigued about this nurse, farm wife person and had a million questions for me at every meal. And this was our last day as we were getting ready to wrap up and head back to all our corners of the United States. And then, of course, Daniel. Really good people, very environmentally oriented, and really doing a lot of good volunteer work. Everybody was volunteering in one way or another. So it was really fun. And this might be my favorite photo, mostly because I sat there a really long time to get this photo. I was sitting on a rock. I was pretty much frozen to the rock, and I was waiting for the sun to just get at a certain spot. The birds were in a shadow, and that's where the challenge with the photography came, because they were deep in a shadow. I would have had to really change my settings to capture all the birds, and I was hoping that I would get a photo where the sun would poke through the shadow and grab the eye of the puffin. And it surprised me when I came across it just the other day. I took about 3,000 photos, and I haven't been through all of them even yet. But I really loved this and felt like it was a special moment for me. And the puffin is ready to take flight. And I figured that was a good spot for me to kind of wrap up my presentation and say, we're taking off. And just super fun to watch these birds. You could just sit and watch them for hours and hours, which we were able to do. And I felt very lucky and very blessed to be able to do that. And this is my final picture. This was where I crossed over the Arctic Circle and hiked up to a spot where I could just really look out at the ends of the world. And it was very moving to me. It really gave me pause to think about 40 years of being a nurse and all the blessings in my life. So it was a very special moment for me. So I thought this saying was very fitting. And that's all I have. So it's a good spot for me to stop and see if there's questions to answer.
Landa, one of the first questions that one of our participants asked was, how do they stay together as mates, the puffins?
Wow. I don't know that answer, really. I suppose it's no different than how we stay together with a mate, I suppose. I mean, how do birds make that decision? I would defer to other birders in the group.
And an accompanying question would be, if a mate is killed, do they try to find another mate?
They do. Yeah, so they stay with the same mate. They use the same burrow. I don't know if they stick with the same burrow, if they're choosing a new mate because of need. I don't know. They do battle each other now and then. So there is that typical, showing you how strong I am, so you want to be my mate. So we didn't really see that because when we were there, the eggs were already hatched.
Landa, Johanna thinks that you should make the puffin sound. And she
And
also,
wouldn't that be my daughter?
well,
Okay.
I dare say, yeah.
I
You're gonna
wish
do it?
I wish my granddaughter was here, because if I do it with her, it's really fun. But all right, I'll give this a go. I'm
Oh, good.
gonna get her later. It's kind of I'm sure they're falling apart laughing.
Good job. She also offered the fact that it's columnar basalt is the question of the cliff.
Oh, well, that was kind of her. Thank you, Johanna.
There was another answer to on that same topic.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Another one of our participants wanted to know what type of equipment did you bring with you? And particularly, did you use a tripod?
Good question. This is not my first adventurous trip. I went to Michigan and I went to Yellowstone one time. So the answer to the tripod is I always take it with me. I lug the thing along and I've never used it yet. And I was sure I would use it on this trip. I really love my tripod. It's an excellent piece of equipment. But with the wind, it just doesn't work. Everything's shook. And if you could get you kind of would prop your hand and your camera and pull your elbows and you could hold things pretty steady. And also when you're getting birds in flight, a tripod is really difficult to use, I think. My camera is a Canon. It's a DSLR and it's a Rebel T7i. So it's a pretty basic camera. I love it because it's what I learned on, and it's not my first one of that series. I think it's my third, and I know how to use it, so that's what I stick with. And my lens is a Tamron 600 millimeter. And I really am, it's well used. I put it that way. I throw it on the front seat of my car every day when I go out, and I've had it out in all kinds of weather. And it has hung in there. So,
Are there mice or rats on this island that you know?
not that they talked about. And we were surprised, especially with the port where all the fishing boats would come in. But they said there really weren't. They have very little there that would be any kind of nuisance. So.
One person wants to know, what time of year was this trip?
Oh, that's a good question. It was in July. June 7th to like June 30th. Their sunrise is at like 12:01 and their sunsets at midnight. So it's like 24 hours of daylight. The sun was setting at, I probably just said that backwards, but the sun was setting when we were there about midnight, and it would rise again at 2. So it was in the middle, it was like the second and third week of July that I was there.
Are the male and female colorations the same? And do you know their lifespan?
The colorations are the same. The difference in size, if I remember this correctly, Daniel said that the female is the larger of the two, but it was really hard to tell the difference. I couldn't look at them and tell you the difference. Their lifespan, they've recorded like up to 20 years that they have lived.
This is a question not really related to birds, but do you know how the buildings on the island are heated?
They had electric heat in our facility, but I think it really was more, and I'm not going to be well versed on this, but like an air exchange. It was a device that went through the wall. Maybe somebody else can help me with that. They had no need for any type of air conditioning. Humidity would probably be the one thing that would be, a bit of a challenge.
Let's see. If the puffins shed their colored beak, did you see pieces of colored beak?
No, we didn't see anything.
Okay.
That's too bad. That would have been a fun thing to collect. Huh?
Yeah.
I came back with a kittiwake feather and a purple sandpiper feather. So that was fun. Yep.
One of our listeners is wondering, do you know if the pufflings that are orphaned by hunters are fed by other adoptive puffin parents?
I don't know that answer. My guess is probably not. They only lay one egg, and I'm sure there's a reason for that with the amount of food that they have to bring, because both of the adults it's just constant motion feeding that puffling. So my guess would be not.
Was there any language barrier up there?
Everybody spoke English, but it had a very, there was a lot of Norwegian influence on the island specifically, and there was very heavy accents, and there were times that people would speak amongst each other, and there was no English, and I don't know it wasn't Icelandic either. They did have a term for it, and I don't remember. But people were very polite, very kind. If you were, they were. They just were very happy to have you there. So,
somebody definitely wants to be you when they grow up.
somebody wants to be me when they grow
Wants to
up.
be you. You got it. Oh my.
I wonder who that is.
And somebody also wants to know, where is the next excursion?
Well, it's funny they ask. I've been thinking about that. I went up to the Fenimore Art Museum after this trip, and there was a display of a photographer who had been at Greenland, and that just kind of keeps poking back at me. But I think right now I'm 2 days into retirement. I think I better sit tight for a minute.
One of our listeners noticed that lots of the species you showed have orange-red legs. Did you notice that? And did you think about that at all?
Well, I figured it was due to being shorebirds, because everything we saw there was a shorebird. So I don't know if there's a reason for that myself. So I think
Go ahead.
I think I have a bit more research I should do.
Do they see whales or other marine mammals from the cliffs?
No, you don't. We talked about that. They said occasionally they will see a whale, but it's pretty rare. Those waters are really, really cold. I'm sure there are species that are there, but I don't know what they are. So the fishing boats would go out with huge drag nets, and they would come. It was amazing to me how much cod they came back with. And the whole bottom of that ferry was packed with cod that they were taking over to the mainland. So, which also didn't really help me that day.
Another person says that she believes that penguins mate for life as well. And she says, it amazes me that they can find each other each year for mating. And that actually made me wonder, do the mates just stay together throughout the year, or do they separate and then get back together?
Boy, I don't know that answer. What we noticed was, there were so many, but they were in groups. So they would be grouped on one colony. There wasn't constant colonies. I mean, anywhere on the island you could see puffins, but there would be sections, and there would be like hundreds in that section. And every now and then the whole section would pick up and take off, and they'd do this huge swirl out over the water, and then they'd come back. So it kind of leads me to believe that they stick together as a group. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the best I can come up with.
Someone noted that most of Iceland's power is generated from thermal, as they sit on volcanoes. So it's really cheap power.
I think that's very true on the mainland. I don't think we didn't notice anything thermal like on this island. This was a rock that came up out of the water, and that was about it.
Another person wants to know a little bit more about the beaks. They wonder, do the puffin beaks grow larger each year? I'm thinking about counting the ridges and so on.
Yeah. And I think they do, because you could see the difference in some of the birds that were younger. But the ridges were how they count each year. but you would really have to have the bird in your hand to be able to count. It was very hard to see that. It wasn't just by color, the ridges changing. So I must, again, I'm going to assume the beaks get bigger as they get older. So I would be so interesting to see like the gray beak, and then as it morphed into the color, that would be really fun to see. So I guess you'd have to go live there though.
You have had many, many wonderful accolades, Landa, and someone wants to know, perhaps another showing, some of the other of the 3,000 you took.
That's the hard work. It's easy to take the picture. It takes a lot of patience to go through these, and I suppose now I have time to do that. So I will work my way through these, and I'll share maybe more on with the Facebook site. I'll send them off to Catherine so she can post them. So I appreciate that.
One last question that has come up is, do you know if other birds predate on puffins?
I don't know so much about on the puffins. It was more on the kittiwakes. There was help me here if I'm going to get this right. There was the black-legged gull. And it was a very large bird. I was not able to get a picture of it. I saw it a couple of times. And they would like go after the kittiwake chicks. And we did see a number of carcasses of the kittiwakes. And Daniel felt like they had probably been attacked by like this really big gull that was there.
Again, just wonderful compliments. Somebody loves your photographic eye. Somebody thinks you should submit some of these to magazines and for awards. Wonderful.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah.
And on that note, I think we can wind down. I think we're pretty well set. And we thank you so much for sharing your adventure with us.
Right, well, thank you for the privilege to do so. I really appreciate it.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Landa. It was wonderful.
Very good. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who came. I appreciate it very much.
Lovely.